Now, this is a very personal question because when I was in college, I went through a terrible faith crisis. And one of the reasons for that was there was a seeming irreconcilable conflict between faith and science. Because I believe, like many, that faith is based on feeling while science is based on fact. That's what many people are taught. In fact, I came to believe that faith was largely based on self-delusion. And that put me on a many-year journey to study this. And I've studied the topic of faith and science for 20-plus years. And what I discovered was pretty amazing. What is actually the case is that faith is not in conflict with science, but science was actually birthed out of faith. In fact, if you look at many of the early scientists, like Isaac Newton's a good example, he was a strong Christian. That's what allowed him to do science. Because to do science, you have to believe the universe is orderly and consistent. In other words, you have to believe it was created by a single God. Also, to do science, you have to believe that we have the capacity to understand that order. In other words, you have to believe that we are created in the image of that God. So faith is essential for science. It's not in conflict. Also, what's interesting is I've studied this further. What's fascinating is it's a lot like Paul talking about in Romans how the evidence for God is written throughout nature. And many scientists have realized, reluctantly, that if you study the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, you study the incredible fine balance of our planet, the fact it's the right distance from the sun, it rotates at the right rate, the fact that we have a moon that perfectly stabilizes our orbit, the fact that the sun is perfect, the fact that we're in the perfect place in the solar system, what it says is that every detail of science was created with the specific purpose of allowing life, that the reality of God is written throughout all of nature. Now, the last issue I had to deal with, though, was evolution, and that's a real tough question for a lot of people. And I was taught that it's just, if you believe in God, you're a fool, because obviously evolutionists showed we're just here by chance. But what's interesting is over the last 20 or 30 years, evidence has come in to clearly show that life cannot be the product of an evolutionary process, but it must be the product of intelligent design. In particular, if you study biochemistry and things along those lines, what's very clear is that natural selection and mutation can only produce very small changes, like a dog growing larger or a dog growing smaller. It cannot do anything innovative or substantial like turning a fish into an amphibian. Also, if you study the fossil record, what you find is the fossil record does not show organisms evolving slowly over time, but it shows that pretty much any species comes into existence like a big bang, suddenly out of nowhere, and once it appears, it does not change in complete contradiction to evolutionary theory. Also, what scientists have discovered is there are certain features of life which are only possibly explained by intelligence, such as the information in the cell. Information is only a product of an intelligent mind. And also, there are molecular machines in the cell which they pretty much exactly resemble human-designed machines, which again is only possible by intelligence. So in other words, faith is not in conflict with science, but what you find is science is in terrible conflict for those who want to deny God as our creator.
I could listen to you all day.
Yeah. That's why we
you
call
and my
him,
son. My son is very strong.
That's why we call him the doctor.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't have anything to add to it.
You know,
That's right.
I'll be the segue, and then you think about it. Brian and I have done stuff on campuses together. I was doing a thing at UCLA one time with a physicist like Brian, and when we got to the question and answer period, and we were making, and mostly my scientist friend was making very compelling arguments, just like Brian said. You know, the fossil record, if evolution is true, which really it comes down to that basically the competing theory with creation is that we came from natural processes, from a natural, materialistic origin, no God, no supernatural. And so when you go, it's either got to be, the evidence has got to be in the fossil record, which Brian said, when you look at the fossils, you see an explosion of life in the oldest rocks. It's like life appears in all of its complexity. You don't see the gradual, what you see theoretically happening. You go down and look at all these areas, probability, life, what is the probability that life started itself? Two scientists, Ramasingh and Fred Hoyle, said the probability is 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000. Now that's a huge number. When I think the stellar universe, how many stars, Dr. Miller? This is the prep quiz bowl here. I think it's something like 10 to the 25th stars in the stellar universe.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. See, I knew I had one fact memorized. 10 to the 25th stars in the stellar universe, yet the probability that life started itself was 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000. Because really, you think about it, either life that you see started itself, or it was started by something besides itself. I did that on one campus, Josh, and the kid raised his hand in the back, and he said, well, there's a third option. I said, well, he said, well, maybe we're not here at all. And I said, well, in that case, you wouldn't be here, so be quiet. But we're here. We're here. So, but when you go down the list and you look at the evidence that if this is true, then this is what you would expect. And in every case, whether it be the fossil record, mutations, the laws of probability, it doesn't add up. And so the only other option is that it could be scientific creation or non-evolution. And so there was this hush in the room as if, okay, you guys are making way too much sense. And so some guy in the back at the question and answer said, and he thought he had us, he said, well, how old do you think the universe is? Now, in spite of all of the evidence that we presented and being rational, not necessarily appealing to the Scripture, but they're saying, hey, fight with us just on a reasonable basis. Okay, let's fight on your rules at least for a while. Then it came back to, how old do you think the universe is? Now, if we said 6,000 years or 10,000 years, then they, throw us out as if we're some narrow-minded fundamentalist. And yet, we know that we believe in creation. So I paused and looked at my physicist friend and said, you answered the question, how old is the universe? And he sat there he hadn't even thought of this, I don't think. He kind of sat there and kind of held his hand like this. He said, well, that would depend on how fast you're going. And there was this hush that came on the room. Half people didn't know what he's talking about. Speaking of Einstein talking about in relativity that, I'm throwing this back to you or Josh, that if you traveled at the speed of light, somehow time slows down. And the two twins could be on the earth. One could blast off, travel at the speed of light, come back, and hardly age. The other twin would have died. Which really gets exciting when you think about God as light and seeing a natural picture of eternity. So anytime somebody, I don't quite understand it, but anytime anybody on a college campus raises their hand and says, how old do you think the universe is? I pause, grab my face just like he did, and I go, wow. That depends on how fast you're going.